was a modern medical miracle that a year ago we were nowhere on a vaccine with a brand new illness, disease that we had not had before. And I think Operation Warp Speed, that was in a series of bills that we passed on an overwhelming bipartisan basis last year, funded an extraordinary success. Not one, not two, but three highly effective vaccines before the end of the year. And these great folks here in Owensboro and all across Kentucky and Indiana as well are putting those shots in those arms. And we're now, amazingly enough, in the position of just making sure as many people as possible actually take it and don't resist taking it, because the indications are that it's totally safe. And the only way we get totally back to normal and get past the mask wearing and social distancing is to get herd immunity, and that requires about 75% of the population.
You mentioned something really interesting in the press conference, that Republican men are actually a group that are hesitant to take the vaccine. Obviously, Kentucky is a very red state. How do you combat that, and were you surprised to hear that that was the type of group that's saying no?
Well, I had seen that in a national news program, but my experience in the state, in Hazard and Bowling Green and Northern Kentucky and now here in Owensboro this week, has been that there hasn't been that kind of reluctance among men. There are a different age group, younger women concerned about the impact of the vaccine on fertility has actually been more of a problem. So I don't know whether that was just a result of a national poll or not, but I just say, as a Republican man, I took the vaccine as soon as I was eligible, and I would encourage all Republican men to do the same thing.
Kentucky and Indiana have a very much symbiotic relationship. We have people traveling back and forth across the Ohio every day for work, for entertainment, to spend money. Governor Beshear is still very much in support of that mask mandate. Governor Holcomb letting that go here in the next week. Where do you think the mask should stand at this point, and when would be the right point to let that mandate go?
Well, look, I give governors a lot of advice on a lot of things, but that's not one of them. I live in Kentucky. I'm going to stick with what Governor Beshear thinks is in our best interest, and not going to go out of my way to criticize other governors who may have a different point of view.
Where do you see in the next 6 months the biggest focus needing to be for Kentucky to continue to improve its strength and economy, but the Midwest as a whole? You've always said you are the supporter of the Midwest in D.C.
Well, I don't think we need any more borrowed money, which is why I voted against the last package. Unemployment, as bad as it was, never got anywhere near what was predicted. In fact, unemployment right now nationally is about the same as it was during many of the Obama years. So I think priming the pump, borrowing more money, raising taxes is not what we need now. This economy is poised to boom. People have been cooped up for a year. It's going to take off like a rocket, and it doesn't need any assistance from borrowed money and higher taxes.
And this plays into my next question. Democrats in Congress are talking about the need of a fourth direct stimulus for extending unemployment. You clearly sound like you don't think that's a necessary target for this year. Is there a situation that you would support something like that?
Well, I think unemployment extensions ought to be related to unemployment. And so we've basically covered the next 5 or 6 months, and let's see what the economy looks like. We want to encourage people to go back to work. And I hear from employers all over Kentucky, and my colleagues hear from employers in their state, that people are reluctant to go back to work because, honestly, many of them are doing better staying home. That's not a good idea. And I think we need to let go of this pandemic and let the economy rise as it's poised to do without any more borrowed money or higher taxes.
And that includes the direct payments as well?
Well, that's already been approved. I mean, everybody's about to get $1,400, and I'm sure they'll enjoy that.
And you wouldn't support a fourth then? You wouldn't support a fourth round of direct payments?
I can't imagine the economy is going to need a fourth round. But there putting together this so-called infrastructure package, which is going to include more borrowed money and big tax increases on the most productive parts of our economy, that may well slow the surge coming just by simply opening up again. And I think that package is going to have little or no support.
What is a version of an infrastructure bill that you would support? You mentioned the one that you had proposed earlier, but what does that look like?
Well, it's smaller and paid for. In other words, not borrowed money and not increased taxes. A size infrastructure bill that fits the amount of money that we raise every year from taxpayers. I mean, we've got to quit borrowing all this money. We already have a debt the size of our economy for the first time since World War II as a result of what we did last year. That can't become just kind of a common way to operate year in and year out. We're sinking the country in debt. Our children and grandchildren are going to be saddled with this.
As far as what we as a country could afford, what would you prioritize?
Well, I do think infrastructure is important. The question is, how much are you willing to pay for?
Roads, bridges, broadband?
Well, I mean, for example, what this big package the president announced in Pittsburgh, apparently there's more money in there for electric cars than for roads and bridges. What is your definition of infrastructure? I think we can all agree that broadband's important. That's underscored once again by the experience during the pandemic. But this package that I think the president's going to be recommending to the House and Senate could best be described as the Green New Deal transportation bill. In
that infrastructure bill, there's $5 billion towards community violence prevention. What do you think is the best step forward for Congress to put an end to the gun violence and the mass shootings that we continually see?
Well, goodness, that just gives you an example of how they grow these bills to fund everything anybody can think of, and then try to drop it in a big bill they're trying to get through Congress. We saw the same thing on the so-called COVID package that just passed a few weeks ago. Allegedly to fight COVID, 1% for vaccines and 9% for health care. So in this multi-trillion-dollar transportation bill, there will probably end up all kinds of items that are unrelated to transportation. I'm prepared and concerned and willing to pay for anything we can afford, but we have to quit borrowing money and adding to the national debt for every good cause that somebody may have.
Specifically, if it didn't spend money, but if there was a law that would be able to better regulate guns and how they're getting into people's hands, something along that lines, is there something you would support in that realm?
Well, you know, the common factor in all of these shootings are young men who have serious mental problems. No matter how we craft gun legislation, the problem is mental illness. It's a vexing problem. It's hard to predict in advance when these young men may explode and commit these atrocities. But whether or not there is a waiting period or some of these other suggestions is almost wholly irrelevant to the problem. Even European countries that have much tighter gun laws than we do have the same thing with deranged younger men. That's the typical profile. That's the dilemma, and that's what we need to target.